I saw a great line a little while ago that, AI is not going to replace you. Someone who can use AI is going to replace you. And I think that's really, that distinction is pretty critical, right? It's not going to be the robot's going to be, bam, your job's outsourced. It's going to be someone who knows how to use it effectively. Yeah.
So, in your context, in your world.
Welcome to the GovComms podcast, bringing you the latest insights and innovations from experts and thought leaders around the globe in government communication. Now, here is your host, David Pembroke.
Hello everyone, and welcome once again to GovComms, a podcast about the practice of communication in government and the public sector. My name is David Pembroke. Thanks for joining me. As we begin, I'd like to first acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which we are broadcasting from today, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to pay my respects to all First Nations people on the lands of which those listening to this podcast today are joining us from. Well, research and market research is fundamental in government communications. And you know that if you work in government, and you know that if you work in tourism, it's more than just cocktails, planes and postcards. It's about jobs, regional economies and economic growth. In today's episode of GovComms, I'm joined by Garrett Tyler-Parker, who is the Director of Analysis and Insights at Tourism Research Australia. Garrett is an experienced expert in the field of analysis and insights, working across multiple industries over the past 15 years, turning practical insights into evidence that decision makers can use to make their best choices. But from market research in Thailand to place-based branding here in Australia, Garrett understands how evidence can shape strategy, support local communities and grow a thriving visitor economy. Garrett, welcome to GovComms.
Thanks, Dave. Great to be here.
Garrett, you've been on the program before in another realm, another life, but perhaps let's just go back to the beginning and tell us your story into the world of research, analysis and insights.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because it's blowing up these days as we see research is becoming data, is becoming AI and analytics, and they're all kind of merging into this bigger and bigger vat of numbers that everybody needs and everybody says that they want. And then, as you touched on in your intro there, what do you do with it though? That's the critical part. So my background initially was psychology. And that's where I kind of came into the market research side because I found it fascinating that there were ways and levers to understand how people think and how behaviour happens. And that could be one, studied, and two, influenced. And then that goes into the world of psychology, but also the market research side as well. So we've got, positive things like behavioural economics, and that might look at how do we nudge people to pay for their train ride more often or, do other things like eat more healthier. And then on the commercial side, how do we convince them to buy our brand of butter instead of someone else's brand of butter as well? So it's got a wide spread, and I think that's why I find it really interesting.
So with this changing world that we're in at the moment, perhaps take us on the journey through your career as to what did this sort of role and function look like when you began 15 years ago? And what does it look like today in terms of the different roles and tasks and questions you're being asked and things that you're being required to do?
It's a good question because there has been a lot of changes as the industry has sped up, particularly during the COVID years. So if I go back 15 years ago, we were just coming out of the time of hole counts when you would run a research study and you'd get a printout with holes on a bit of paper and literally count them to see what's going on. So that was just before I started in the industry. That had been
a
phased
hole
out.
Count.
Yes, and that
like punching holes.
Yep.
And you would physically count the holes.
So the language still existed, but I didn't. Fortunately, I'm not that old. I wasn't doing the hole counts, but that's what it was referred to. So we'd run an online survey, and the directors at the time where I was working would say, "Check the hole counts." And even though it was all online, that was what we were looking at.
Okay.
That slowly kind of has faded out now as a bit more of a moved on. I think what's been really interesting as well has been over this time, that side of research, the quantitative or the numbers side, has kind of ebbed and flowed. We saw big data come in, and as a predominantly quantitative researcher those days, when people said, well, now we've got credit card data, now we can track people's spend and that, they said, you're going to be out of a job. What happened 2 years later, though, we had more data than ever before. We had so much of the what, but none of the so what. People didn't know why they were spending where they were going, or why they walked somewhere past a store and into another one. So there was still so much need for the research. And now what we're looking at is the amalgamation of the two. So we're seeing the survey data coming in, being essential to help explain what's going on, and the big data side of stuff, like we're doing at Tourism Research Australia using mobility data to be able to understand movement on a level that would never be possible with traditional market research approaches.
Wow. That's a big change, isn't it?
It's massive, yeah. And then that doesn't even touch into the world of AI, which I know you've touched on in other areas as well. And other podcasts.
And look, I'm really keen to jump into that, because I think to understand just exactly around automation and scraping and then the analysis of AI and just in fact how you are thinking about it, and indeed understanding how much of it you are actually doing at the moment. There's quite a bit of talk about it, but how much actual application there is. But we'll come to that. But I'm still fascinated, sort of, as you've rolled through these different phases. Can you tell us sort of, or give us some stories from the days past of some of the more prominent campaigns and research programs that you've worked on, and some of the insights that you might have discovered?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. It's, I guess that's the benefit of it. Career going for a good few years. There's a couple of fun little things along the way.
Yeah.
If I go back a while and look at some of the, international brand trackers that I ran. So back in the day, working with Qantas as well even, and, just how they would position themselves in the different markets. So we were looking at their brand equity and familiarity and these kind of things in these markets. And it's so interesting to see how, this was over 10 years ago, and Qantas absolutely dominated Australia, as it still does, to a great extent these days as well. But the home base compared to the international was such a significant difference, and understanding those global differences, as well as, how people in different markets even answer surveys and respond to different data. So the cultural differences we would see in India, for example, people much more likely to agree positively on a scale. That's just a way that they answer questions more. And interestingly, Kiwis, our neighbours across the ditch, much more likely to be a little bit more negative as well. So you could almost be having a similar result.
Depends how the All Blacks go.
Yeah, and so it's so interesting when we try to compare, say, India to New Zealand results for, travel and tourism with Qantas, for example. Completely different results, but actually the market situation could be remarkably similar. So that kind of world of international understanding there was so interesting.
And how did you go about gathering that insight that they were so different? They weren't just different sort of ends of a scale.
There's some fantastic academic research, I think, that we lean on in this area, and I think the name of it is like Hofstede's Cultural Dimensions from memory, and
that helps you to understand the behaviours in each different country.
Yeah, it talks about how much people are say followers versus more likely to be leaders in their own kind of cultural community, a bit more aspects around sort of, what makes that culture unique across, I think, about 7 different factors. And they really influence how, as a whole, and it's hard to, group together an entire culture, obviously, but there are some keys from that you can help indicate, which is super interesting.
Okay. And so how then did Qantas take this data and make decisions? How did you as a researcher present that information to them in such a way that it was useful for them to be able to make decisions?
It was a real interesting balance across what's going on in a market and across a market. So without anything, knowing across the time then you didn't know what to do. So if you just tried to compare point in time to, as I said, what's going on in India and New Zealand, you're like, gee, New Zealand's really low at the moment, and wow, we're killing it in India, which didn't quite make sense all the time. So it was critical with that one that we looked across time. So we were in market, I think, every quarter, seeing what's going on in those spaces. And that started to give a good indicator then of, who are your competitors in this space? What is the drivers in terms of like attitudes and decision making in those particular markets at the moment? Where are people going as well, which is always very interesting and moved around. And then that gave you much more an understanding about, okay, now we know a bit more a picture about how things have changed month on month, what trends are happening, and now we have something to do about that.
How important is time in market research?
I think it's quite a critical element. I see every now and then these very interesting point-in-time studies. If I think about the tourism sector, there might be one, say, I saw recently on Chinese travel. And it sort of says, it's booming right now, it's going massive, which is really great. But the realistic side of it is there's whole countries and areas that Chinese travel hasn't even recovered to compared to 2019 levels. So while it may be looking like it's very big in 2025, compared to where it was before we had the pandemic, it hasn't even fully recovered. So some of those point in time are really critical, but I do think as well that, looking at something back as far as 2019, it's 6 years ago, right? So sometimes people get a bit caught up in saying, what's the 10-year trend? Interesting, but I wouldn't put all your eggs into that basket.
What about examples working in government and with government communications? You obviously have a longish career, certainly not just working for Tourism Research Australia. You've worked in the private sector, working to government for a number of years.
Yes, yeah. So previously in my old role as a market research consultant and market researcher in that space, we had a good number of campaigns that we worked with Federal Treasury as well as some here locally in Canberra with the ACT government, and some of the smaller agencies around town as well in terms of evaluating their comms, their campaigns. And I think there's, as you would well know, and I'm sure many of your listeners would know, it's such a variation in terms of budget and impact. You're talking Treasury on one side of things and then the Therapeutic Goods Administration was another client on the other side, and very different scope in terms of what they can do, which often led to, I think, different approaches and attitudes toward flexibility, which is quite fun. So I think when you're in some of those bigger spaces, it can be difficult to, say, leap into the world of co-creation. But some of those smaller agencies, we could do some interesting studies and, say, dive into, okay, what does this look like in terms of the initial creative idea, rather than just let's track it in market and see what's going on.
What do you mean by co-creation in that context?
In that context, we're talking about looking at our consumers, our end users, or the main people who engage with us, and bringing them into the room in the early kind of process.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then understanding, okay, what is it that we need to know from you? What is the best way to work with you?
100%.
What is the best way to understand you?
Yes.
As a cohort?
Yeah. And I think as a researcher, it's really important to acknowledge that we have so much data on people, on all of us as well, that you can get, and on cohorts, but it's not the same as fronting up to someone and actually having a conversation with them. And I think that side, if we think about the two spheres of research, or not really just two spheres, but quantitative being the numbers side and qualitative being, person interviews, focus groups, that sort of thing, I think that face-to-face qualitative side, it seems to be fading a bit, and it's so critical to have that still understanding there. And I see it when I talk about numbers, with people. I could say something like 80% of people think that it's a good idea that we, engage with this government campaign about buying in Australia. And people go, yep, that makes sense, good job. And then you give one example of, say, an older woman who has her families coming over for Christmas, and she's decided she wants to do Australian purchasing of products for that Christmas dinner. And that one story about one person, that's what a lot of people leave the room with. They remember there was a lot of agreement, there was a big number, this is supported, but it's the critical human side that still brings the numbers to life.
Yeah, right. So for people who are listening to the podcast, generally people working in government communications, what advice do you have for them if this might be their first campaign? They may have, first done, this is the task that they've got. And as part of that, research is obviously fundamental. There needs to be an evidence base around, the creative and distribution and other things.
Yep.
So what should they be thinking about? What questions should they be asking as they engage with a market research organisation?
Some of the best campaigns I've been involved in, and this is thinking about some of the federal government work I've done as well, has been when we've been able to see that there is formative market research. So typically...
what's that? What's formative market research?
Yes, sorry, jargon already, isn't it? No good. Well, I suppose typically market research is a requirement to be brought in at the evaluation side, which you can get to in terms of how did the campaign go in market, how many people saw it, did it have a positive uplift in terms of, engagement or action or this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that'll typically always happen. It's pretty much written into most briefs. But the formative side is when the idea is firstly coming to life, and whether that can be about, paying more attention to your superannuation or, stopping less use of vapes or whatever it may be. That formative research is all about what does this idea look like before we even hit the campaign side. And it's a really, I think, critical step for the comms people to be able to sort of, in some ways, you kind of let go a little bit of the control, but you get back so much more. Because if you can go, okay, instead of just going straight to the creative and let's get some awesome creative ideas straight away, let's push firstly into the market research and get a formative idea around what are the triggers, what are the barriers to engagement in this area. We think this is an issue with young Australians, but let's do research with young, old, young families, old families, see if they're being impacted too, about this particular issue. And you get back this fantastic shape about the issue and across Australian society, key topics. You might have had a fantastic idea, say, to talk about, the house prices and be like, it's a great time to get in the market. But then you do research with like millennials and you find they've been bombarded with that message for 20 years and they're just going to tune right out as soon as they hear it. Yeah. So these kind of things, that formative side can just be really useful.
So is it but do you have to help the market researchers with a simple proposition as to where it is that, the outcome of this, we want it to be X. You tell us what you tell us what people think because we don't know, or that's where we want to end up. Or do you have to give them more information to help them on their journey? Or are market researchers happy to go, all right, great, you'll let us go in and see if we can find the answers.
Let us go out wild there and just see what comes back. I think the comms people I've worked with across government, the ones who are keen for the regular check-ins, are definitely, I would say, the best. It's certainly more work on the research side to be, having a fortnightly check-in to see like, okay, what have you found? What's going on? But
do you think that's good from a market researching point of view? Is that best practice that you're chatting along the way?
If you've got a research program that can iterate a little bit, then 100% I do. So if you're running, say, qualitative focus groups and you're going to do a few in 1 week and then stop and have a bit of a chat, it's tricky for the researchers because to sort of only have done, say, 3 focus groups and then be asked, okay, what have you found? Yeah. It might change next week. Yeah. But sometimes it's those early grains, and there's some, we've got some fantastic researchers in Australia as well who can start to see, I'm finding a little bit of interesting topics going on with this, or we're just not connecting with the CALD community when we talk about this at all, culturally and linguistically diverse. Yeah. And I think that stuff is awesome, and the comms team to have that flexibility to go, oh, okay, can you dig into that a bit more? Or, we already knew that. Actually, we've got some formative, similar evaluation research around that. So it's really good.
So if you open up the kimono and sort of go through this process of how you think about it, so you've got a government agency, the comms team have got this campaign, they've come to you and they've said, Garrett, we need to get the answers about a particular policy, and you say, okay, how much money have you got? And they'll say, well, we've got whatever. You negotiate some sort of budget. It's probably never enough from a market research point of view, probably too much from the other side of things. But you've landed on whatever that figure looks like. What does a process look like from there?
Often you're rather fixed into the method and approach then, because you've had to agree on the contract that we will do a nationally representative survey of Australians to understand what's going on, and we'll run a few focus groups, or we'll do some depending on what the topic could be. It could be walking interviews, or in-house little friendship group gatherings.
Okay.
But I think what's really great, and this is, I guess, coming back to that point I said before, if the comms team is able to sort of give a bit of free rein, but still, make sure they're involved in the process, so that the research doesn't completely lose its head and go off into an unnecessary area, then that's great. So you might not have to say to the research agency, I want to lock down the discussion guide for those interviews now. It might be, okay, let's see what happens with the survey and then write the discussion guide so we know what we're going to be talking about, or let's come back and visit it after 1 week and see what could be changed.
But is that a place for comms people to be working with the researchers to come up with the discussion guide, or isn't that the work of the researchers to say, well, look, to get this outcome, really, this is how it's going to, as opposed to, I've been in market research now for, 2.5 weeks, and I think that these are the questions that we should ask.
Yeah, true. And maybe I didn't quite put that right. I guess I more mean that giving the scope for change. So it's that idea that the researchers could say, this is what we think is going to be best. And to your point, the researchers aren't trying to tell the comms people what campaign they should run, because they're not communications experts. I'm not. I love working with comms. I think it's a critical part of the research journey. But I think on the comms side, being able to say, okay, what are you seeing now, what's going on? And if they say, look, I think we need to look into this a little bit more within scope, within budget, but slight change in terms of topic and tact, then being open to saying, yep, go for it.
Yeah. And so being helpful is obviously a couple of things there. One is to stay interested, stay curious, and to stay helpful. So how can comms people help market researchers to be more effective?
I think that there is a common thought that I've seen among a fair bit of research that it is a bit set and forget sometimes. So you commission the market research company and they say, great, we'll see you in 6 weeks with an answer. It's going to be more work for the market research organisation. So my friends back in the private sector, I'm sorry, setting those weekly, fortnightly cadence catch-ups, which isn't uncommon, is really, really useful, is the first bit. I think the other thing, though, as well, is that often as the market researcher, we're an expert, as you said, in research, but not in the topic that's been looked into. So we may know a lot about, say, health research overall, but may not be experts about, as I said before, like vapes, for example, whereas the person at Department of Health that they're working with is. So passing on any additional information, and that can be an ongoing thing too. I think sometimes we feel like, well, the project's underway. I forgot about this fantastic report from Canada that was shared with me. And if it comes up again, just send it through. Any information is going to make a better outcome.
So that sounds to me like, get your policy colleagues along for the discussion around market research, because they're the ones who've have the knowledge. They're the experts in those particular areas. Yeah,
it's such a good point. I think sometimes we do get in our little silos as well. And, the comms team might be like, this is what we're doing, the comms side of it. But you're right, the comms has typically flowed from some kind of policy. So understanding that nuance is really helpful too.
Yeah. So just in terms then of some of the changes that have taken place, because if we look at the behaviours around how people are now consuming information, how they're creating, distributing information, this fragmentation of the information entertainment world ecosystem landscape that we operate in. The introduction of new technologies. How is it changing the work of market researchers? Because back in the day, there was television, there was radio, there was print, and then we had the internet, and now we have this, free for all, multiple channels, multiple discussions.
Yeah.
How has it changed the way that market researchers go about their business?
I suppose sticking on the comms side of it and looking to the outputs, I think is probably the kind of interesting topic there. So I was just looking the other day about engagement with reports, so research reports. So I think just earlier this year, the UN did a study about how many of their reports are even read. And they say like the top 5% get downloaded heaps, shared, read, all sorts of things. A whole bunch of them either don't even get read, or some don't even ever get downloaded. And going back even further, there's a study from the World Bank. I think an academic did a study on the World Bank research reports that showed that something like 40% of them never even got downloaded. So if these reports have been written with the objective of giving people that evidence base so that they can do some fantastic decision making and lead to better outcomes, this is where that comms side is critical. A research report that sits on a shelf is less use than a drink holder. Like it can't do anything.
Yeah, exactly. So that fits around the comms role in supporting the research in that particular function. But in terms of the actual role of the market researcher and observing those changes of behaviour and skills, I suppose, that you've had to acquire over time, what skills are you using today that perhaps you didn't use 5 years ago because of this changed environment in the way information now moves?
Data visualization would be a massive one that has really boomed. And there's the main global programs for that, as we're seeing. So Tableau and Power BI being critical in terms of how information's presented. I think, though, that, and this is certainly more my opinion, but I think that data literacy hasn't necessarily kept up with interest in data. So I think we're so much more fixed on show me the dashboard, show me the figures, what's going on. But I don't believe that everybody who gets this data and looking at it always has an understanding of, if we're seeing minor fluctuations in, say, engagement with your campaign or behaviors over time. Like, is this a trend? Is it just a little bump in the data? So yeah, while that data visualization is critical, how we actually communicate that is really important too.
And that data literacy piece, for people who are working in comms, what are the things that they should know or learn to be more effective? Because, as you say, the way information is presented is critically important. Perhaps it is going to become, if it hasn't already become, an important part of a comms person's role because they've got to explain it to somebody else.
Yep.
How do they acquire those skills? How do they lift that, quotient of data literacy intelligence?
Yeah, I'd say one tip that I've found really useful over the years is bringing big numbers down to something that people can handle. So when we say, say like 2.5 million Australians are affected by this disease, that's such a big number that you can't even get your head around it. But if you can say 1 in every 10 Australians,
right.
So if you look around the room, then 1 of you has this. People can suddenly bring it into their own world. And on the comms side of things, that data literacy, that gives you lean in moment. And then when you've got that hook, then you can take people a bit further along and start sharing some of the bigger data that can be a bit more communicated around that. But without that first sort of, and I see it with spend figures too, particularly in tourism, we might say there's been spend of 180, what has it been now? I think it's about $187 billion in the tourism industry.
Completely meaningless.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like it's all you know is that's huge, right? Like it's a massive number.
Yeah.
But when you can break it down, like every international visitor that comes in, on average, spends about $4,000.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, okay. So every person who comes through that gate in Sydney Airport from overseas, that's $4,000 into our economy.
Yeah.
Like suddenly that makes sense about why we should focus on that as an audience.
Yeah. So take us to your role as the Director of Analysis and Insights at Tourism Research Australia, because Obviously, it's fundamentally important to the economy. It's a big part of the global economy, not just here in Australia, but tourism is massive for so many countries. How do you think about your job? How does it all come together? What do your higher ups expect you to be able to deliver?
Well, we have a few core reports that we deliver annually.
I hope they get downloaded.
They do, fortunately. But I do have our comms team at Austrade, to thank for some of that engagement, that's for sure. And these have become critical parts of the industry. So if I take a step back on Tourism Research Australia side of it, it's the official tourism statistics for Australia. So we comply with the UN definition and way of measuring and evaluating things. So there's many different aspects you can look at and how you can measure things, but this is the official numbers from us. So with that comes a lot of weight, but also comes a lot of responsibility, because when we say international spend has gone up, that's the number. So, which is quite critical. So we're releasing our forecasts next week, and that's the forecast for the next 5 years for tourism. So to be able to talk about what we're seeing from the international and domestic visitation side, that's one of our core releases. If I get back to your question about, what are the key things that people want from us, that's one of our number one reports. But again, how do we get that out there and make sure people see it? It's one thing to publish it on our website, but any channels that we can work through to push that, we certainly do. So work with our wider Austrade counterparts to push that through LinkedIn and even on Instagram as well there. And we've developed over the years, actually, Tourism Research Australia have their own mailing database. So we send out our own newsletter every time we have a major release, and that's got quite high engagement, which is really good.
How many people have you got on that?
About 10,000.
Okay.
Yeah. And then through all the states and territories. So we work really closely with every state and territory, and we're very lucky in that regard that we've got a fantastic relationship with the heads of typically research, insights and strategy across every state and territory. So when we have the release, we always send them the embargoed copy beforehand. It's in our agreement with them, so they can get all their ducks in a row. And then when the release date happens, there's media releases, ministerial releases from federal, local, state territories, all that sort of stuff. So you get a real concerted effort in terms of pushing out some of our key reports.
Yeah. So how far back have you got the data around some of the forecasts and some of the other tourism data?
I think some of it goes back to 1998. Okay. So a long stretch. That's the domestic side. And then I think international's down to 2004 from memory. But across that time, a lot's changed. So to your question that you started with, when firstly they began understanding domestic tourism, they were calling people's home phones and saying, hey, have you been on a trip recently from the government? Tell me about it. And people were like, yeah, no worries. And have a great chat. Then that had to get phased out and brought into mobiles because landlines, as you know, have just dropped off. And now, no one answers their phone. No. Even if you know the number, half the people don't answer their phone.
No.
So that now, again, had to change. What's been really interesting in that is this is now where we've brought in mobility data. So that is mobile phone tracking data, essentially, because from that we can see, and it's all anonymized and disaggregated. So we're not, we can't see into any individuals, but we can see, generally where people are traveling to, how long they stay, that kind of thing. But we still need the survey. And what's interesting is that we've gone back to, or the classic way of actually going door to door and going face to face with some of this research, and that points to something I think that's much bigger and really interesting in the industry is, how do you know that your research is legit, that you're talking to real people? And that's a really tricky one when we're moving in the online space, when we're seeing bots and these kind of things, being able to jump in and answer surveys on people's behalf. But if you open the door and you talk to somebody, it's pretty hard to fake that.
Yeah, but that's expensive, I imagine. So there'd be limited doors that you'd be able to knock on, wouldn't there?
Yes, and to be completely honest, it's a door first approach, and then if the person is amenable to doing the surveys and that, then they're recruited to doing other online surveys as well. So, but the whole point is still can you be certain you've got this actual person rather than just having people sign up online. It does cost more than doing just a straight online approach, but I think for that's where you got to weigh off that price and quality aspect of things, and it seems to be worth it.
Yeah. So we talk about mobility data. So that's obviously from the major mobile
from
phone.
one of the big telcos. Yep. So we get that, and that's been a really interesting development and bringing that into the official tourism statistics. So
how long's that been the case?
Just this year has been the start of it.
Just this year?
Yep.
Oh, wow.
So we ran we've been working with them at Tourism Research Australia for about 2 years prior to 2025.
To get this integration happening. Okay.
Yeah, so looking at their data, what they capture, really interesting things about, and again, hopefully most people know that they're kind of being tracked all the time by their mobile, but if not, surprise. But there's things that, you can see that if, say, your phone is regularly put in, doesn't move much in a night, then that can be tagged as, well, that's probably where your home is.
Yep.
And then if you go somewhere else during the day a fair bit, that's probably where your work is.
Yep.
So you can start to see people's movements over time. And then from there, you can start to see when they go off the beaten track. And that's when they start to have trips, and whether that be day trips, overnight trips, all these kind of things. And so looking across that data, it's just given us a whole nother world of granularity, frequency of data that wouldn't ever been able to get from surveys before.
How do you analyse all of that stuff? Is this where the technology comes in? Is this where the AI is starting to come in to help you to bring some fidelity to this sort of ocean of numbers?
Definitely. And we have another team within Tourism Research Australia who just work on innovation side of things, who are focused on this and looking at, as well as, it's in the title, right? In the innovation side, what's next as well. So looking at, say, spend data, for example, as I touched on before, there's credit card data, there's bank data out there as well.
You don't have that yet?
Not yet, but that's probably going to be the next step, because at the moment we're sort of asking people, what did you spend? What did you do? Which, not everybody remembers. So,
but other government agencies get access to that type of data, don't they? So I think the Reserve Bank and the Tax Office, and I know during COVID, for example, a lot of the major supermarkets and major banks also provided a lot of their data as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So why don't you get that data? You haven't asked for it, or
I suppose we're looking into it. Well, so we have been looking into it for the last year or so. Because we're those official tourism statistics, we want to make sure that the data we get, firstly, is fit for purpose, and then that it's the right quality level of data as well. Not that the other stuff hasn't been, but it's got to be able to suit and match what we're looking for. So we don't want to just go, great, let's put it in the mix and see what happens. We'll take our time with it and give it that rigor.
So what does that process look like from sort of the beginning of the development of these forecast reports all the way through to the big bang, where, South Australia's put out their version of it, Tasmania's put their version out of it. We've got ministers, everywhere. We've got local tourism bodies, talking about their particular element of it. So what does that process look like from soup to nuts?
There's a lot of good stuff going into those. So if I think about, as you said, the forecast report, we're looking far and wide to begin with at that. So we had, as an example, we had a great query come back from South Australia about the recent forecasts. And they said, we can see our numbers, look a little bit different to some of the other states and territories. Can you just give me a few talking points so I explain to our minister what's going on there? And so I chatted with the team, and they're looking at population growth, the economy of nearby states such as Victoria, how that's influencing their interstate travel as well. Yep. Then the wider economic situation that's going on in Australia and airline connectivity. And they're saying as well as a bunch of other factors, but that was a sort of top 3 or 4 to say, airline connectivity is moving like this. The South Australian ageing population means there's probably a bit more less travel going like this. Victoria's government is looking like that. which is leading to these figures. And that kind of stuff is all sort of constantly pouring in. So one of the hardest things to do with it, actually, Dave, is where do you draw the line? When do you stop taking data in?
Well, I imagine there's no end to it, really.
It's true.
Yeah. So do you gather at some point? So do you spend a whole lot of time? I don't know how many months it is getting all the information together, and then how long from the gather stage to the analysis stage to the insight stage to the report stage? What does that look like?
It varies by report, but for something as big as the forecasts and as critical for that, it's pretty much a half-year project. So starting, back in actually even a little bit longer, I think. So back in March is when we start seeing, okay, what are some trends that are already coming through this year, so that we could start to look at, how our forecasts went last year and were we on the money with that? Were we up? Were we down? And that starts to shape initially from there where we're looking for the next step. And when June,
so you're monitoring this stuff on a daily basis. So you're in a position where you're against real time, against forecast. You're then saying, okay, we're actually look at our forecast. We're pretty good on that.
Yep, yeah, we are. So once we release them for the kind of first few months, we're certainly looking and going, how close did we hit it? Is it looking good? Is it tracking nicely?
Yep.
And then we start. Instead of looking backwards, then from there we start looking forwards after that, going, what's going on? And to your point before, we chat with our friends at the Reserve Bank of Australia. We chat with the ABS as well.
Yep.
Send them some data. They send us some data. We all have a bit of a look and say, we're seeing this. What are you seeing?
Yep.
And, that part's
So there is a
critical.
big community of public sector research, not only the providers, the market researchers who are the sort of private sector providers, but there's a community of research inside the, say in Australia at least, the federal government.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I'm pretty sure you guys are pretty well involved with it as well, but like the data professions and the digital professions as well. So the data profession set up by the APSC, they've got like fantastic information about what's going on in different areas as well, which is quite a useful source too.
Yeah.
To be able to tap into. But it's trying to do these things in isolation would just be lead to failure.
Yeah, indeed. So where next, as you say, in terms of technology, in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of your innovation team, what they're looking to, what is coming? Because it's all a little unsettling at the moment as we all, I know in the communications world, for example, it's now far more driven by how do you be effective in this world where the citizen now controls the information, the education, the entertainment they receive, when they receive it on their device, at what time. It's much more a pull than a push, and so comms people have got to get used to the change. The lessening influence of free-to-air television, the importance of the social media channels, like all of this sort of movement. Yep. Creates different behaviour, which ultimately means, to be effective with your communication, you've got to, test and learn, adapt, change. So where to then for research as this maelstrom continues to accelerate, as more technology, more data, more computing power is put behind, society?
I'll sort of say where I think it's going and what I think is a bit of a risk in that as well.
Yep.
So with the big data being more and more available, everyone who runs a website can pull pretty much daily figures, right, in terms of how many hits you had, unique visitors, all this kind of stuff, and across other areas as we talked about, spend, mobility data. I think we're going to see more and more of this, and similar to what we saw probably about maybe 8 years ago now when big data really sort of took off. I anticipate with AI being able to analyse it more, people are going to assume they can pull out some insights from this, and most likely they can get some stuff. I think this will lead to a bit of a pullback in terms of some research happening. And then 2 years down the track from that, when that sort of peaks, we're going to see research come flooding back because people are going to realise that they've got all these numbers. And again, they can see number went up, number went down, but why? What happened? What went on with it? And that is most likely, in my opinion, what we're going to see in a few years from now, that we're going to be absolutely bombarded with data. There's going to be a whole new world of analysts and people. The data scientist career path, that's massive now. I think if you have AI experience in your CV, you probably get you can walk into anything at the moment. But in a couple of years, I think we're going to see this all go, okay, but what does it mean? What's going on? And again, on that, this qualitative side, really understanding what people are thinking and saying, which, to your point, with much being more pull in terms of our engagement with entertainment, with anything really, it's even more critical because the attention span, it's quick, right? So to be able to actually get someone to sit down and go, what's going on, that's hard. You're not going to get that from a survey, and you're certainly not going to get it from big data.
So how do you deal with that? How do you tool up your organisation to make sure that they have the skills to be able to be effective in the attention economy, where there is, as you say, so much competition for people's most valuable asset, which is really their time and their attention?
Yeah. The evidence base is always going to be critical, and a lot of that's still always going to be numbers. Did we measure it? Did we validate it? That kind of thing. And that's always going to, that's now so solidified that's always going to be there.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not advocating to get rid of that. I think, I enjoy that work. And
the numbers are the numbers, aren't they?
Yeah. But it's the numbers give you the what, and then hopefully a good researcher can give you the so what, and a good comms and strategy person can give you the now what.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is going to be getting more and more critical, to not just turn to using an AI to give you a now what, because I think what we might end up with there is things such as, a similar strategy popping out from everybody, because if they're all using a similar kind of approach, which is an AI to analyze their data and write something, it's all going to end up similar and pretty bland and boring, and you won't be able to get that cut through anyway, or you're not going to have that genuine understanding of what's going on.
What are you doing individually, as to keep yourself current, to keep yourself relevant, to keep yourself effective?
Still working in this space, yeah. A few different things. So I'm actually leaning more a bit into the comms side. As I've come into Tourism Research Australia, I've seen that we're sitting on this absolute wealth of data, and it's fascinating stuff. One of the first things I did in my role there was start to reintroduce running webinars of our information and putting out infographics for the 40-page reports that we're writing. Purely to that point that you were talking about, that attention span side of things. Getting to conferences and presenting that information in front of a couple hundred people for 20 minutes is, even though technically it's available to anybody worldwide when the report's there, that 20 minutes gets you so much more engagement and use of the information. And I think at the core of almost any researcher, everybody wants their information to be used and actioned. And if it just gets written and left on a shelf, that's one of the, that makes you sad, right? Like that's something that you don't want to see.
Well, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, a big part of it is, I think, really leaning into that side of how do we make sure that these numbers become words, become actions. That's a big part of it. On the complete other side of things, looking into how do you do the back end sort of programming side of these sort of things. So we have people in our team who know, what's called the languages like SQL, SAS, Python, this kind of stuff. I previously have only dabbled in these and got beginner knowledge, and I'm starting to see more and more the relevance of understanding this from being a market researcher who really loves communicating it. I just really want to make sure I understand that back end side even more as well.
Are you excited by it, or does it give you anxiety? Because I sort of move from one to the other. Some days I'm like, oh my God, really? And then sort of the next day I'm like, okay, I'm sort of getting my head around it. But then it's sort of something else happens and it's like, oh gosh, look at this. This is another, and trying to understand, automation processes and workflows and because this is this is the nuts and bolts of all of this, because it's easy to say, oh, we use AI, but then it's, well, okay, but how do you use it and how do you integrate it effectively into
Yeah.
a workflow that it is actually going to deliver something that's of use and of value. And really, it's the reworking of pretty much every workflow that needs to be considered as to whether or not it's appropriate
Yes.
or not.
Yeah, and I think I saw a great line a little while ago that, AI is not going to replace you. Someone who can use AI is going to replace you. And I think that's really that distinction is pretty critical, right? It's not going to be the robot's going to be, bam, your job's outsourced. It's going to be someone who knows how to use it effectively. Yeah.
In your context, in your world.
Yeah.
Because we're all different, aren't we? Comms people have got their processes and workflows.
100%.
Which are very different to market research, very different to data scientists, very different to policy.
Yes.
But it is understanding and unpacking and then repacking. Interestingly, here at this company that I run, we're in this, 12-month journey of, okay, let's unpack it all.
Wow.
How do we, how do we run this show, and then how do we pull it apart, and then how do we repack it with the benefit of different models and different workflows, and it's a fascinating process. So
and I think others are going through those similar journeys, and
I don't think you've really got to. I came to the realisation that I didn't really have a choice. I was at the point of sticking my fingers in my ears and this will pass, and then realising, well, actually, it's not, and it's now becoming more fundamental. But also, it's quite exciting when you do see some of these workflows come in, some of these automation that comes in. It's like, oh, okay, so that's automation. That's what that looks like, and that's how we're getting access. And I think in the information space that we all swim around in government, there's just so much to be gained and gathered. And just a simple one before we go, Senate estimates is in Australia, people listening overseas, it's our sort of accountability for our upper house for the public service to go and answer questions from the senators. And so this goes on for days and days and days. And there's huge amounts of preparation that goes in every government department to prepare, the leadership to be able to answer the questions of the senators. And so these committee hearings go on for days, really. And there is just such a wealth of information that is available. And to your point about research not being read, well, for years I've been thinking, God, I'd love to go back and read that. But I've never had, you just don't have the time because you're on to the next thing, and you're on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And so these vast troves of information, and again, really, when you think about government departments, all they are is information factories. They're just full of...
There's a lot of information.
There's a lot of information that is sitting out there that's very useful and valuable. But again, trying to think about, okay, now how can we organise something so as that I can create an agent of some sort that can do this work on my behalf, but they can say, hey, Dave, well, here's what you really need to know from what happened yesterday. And so I'm going to be better in my job because I've got that information that I wouldn't have, you're not going to get it in a media report. You're not going to get it, because they're not looking for the things that I'm looking for. So
I think
anyway,
I think it's what's good to see, at least in the sort of the chat around AI, is that it's moved from being this magic bullet, the senior staff being like, can we have the AI do this thing? And it's like, well, no, to, what you're talking about now, where people are, okay, it can't do everything. It's not going to solve it all. No. And the human is still going to be in the loop. So it's a tool. Like, what's the most effective way to use this tool?
Yeah.
And that's what I think is the exciting part that I'm seeing, is that point where people are going, great, we've got something fun we can play with here now. What's the best way that we can actually use it?
Yeah, and it's fascinating, and because I think across all of our workflows in the communications company that I run, there are so many of them, whether it be content creation. And I know our guys are using it all the time. Just an interesting point the other day, I went to, on another podcast I do in the wonderful world of rugby union, I went to Japan and did a whole series of interviews in Japan about Japanese rugby. But we have access to an AI, which is called 11 Labs, which is a translation and dubbing exercise. Okay. So anyway, select Japanese, and then all of a sudden, all of that content that we created was then dubbed into Japanese.
It's fantastic.
So my voice, my tone, my timbre, like it sounds like, if you can imagine me speaking now, but speaking in Japanese, that's what it sounded
That's amazing.
like. That's what it sounded like. And then the transcript was all there. And so in terms of reaching culturally and linguistically diverse audiences here, for example, if you're a government agency looking to do that, this is what AI can do. And this is what AI is now doing and delivering.
That's a fantastic example.
Yeah.
That's great.
Test and learn.
Yep.
We did it. Did it work? Yep, it worked. And so now we're thinking about, okay, well, what does that do for us next? How we now think about that capability? Even all the way down to, in a podcast, we had a soundtrack of one of our guests wasn't particularly good, put it through the AI, fixed the AI, boosted it using the particular tool, and then all of a sudden we recovered the sound, enhanced the soundtrack from what it was. But again, it was an AI tool that was able to do that. And so, again, when you start chopping up all of your little work processes and workflows and then think, well, where does it fit here? Where does it fit here? Where does it fit here? Where does it fit here?
And I think that's the way to come at it, rather than going, how do we get to this end product from the ground zero? It's not going to work.
Well, it can't work. And I was there not that long ago thinking, well, where is this silver bullet that's just going to come in and just do it all?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's just time and a bit of detail and a bit of attention to detail and a lot of curiosity.
Yes.
And some skill and expertise. We now have people who actually understand this stuff working in our organisation, which is helping us on this journey. But yeah, I would imagine sort of 12 months' time from now, we will be AI enabled and we'd be much more efficient and effective and be able to say, well, that used to take us this amount of time. And again, in some of the podcast production areas, we're seeing recapture of time getting it back because we're using those tools more effectively and efficiently, which is helping us get through.
That's great.
Things. Yeah. So again, they're real world examples of what this looks like in my world.
Yep.
And I imagine in your world, in the research world, and trying to understand, as you say, cleaning up bots, for example, how is it? Because maybe we're not going to be able to go and knock on so many doors, but then how can we train AI in such a way that it knows that that's a bot, that it's not real? And
Yeah.
so it can...
Well, even on the other side, taking that to the extreme though, there's research companies, there's this interesting one over in America called Evidenza. They run full AI-based research. So they are building personas of the type of people that you would want to research.
Yeah.
And so instead of taking 4 weeks to turn around, they're saying, okay, you want to talk to, I don't know, young mothers for some product that you might be looking to look. Yep, no worries. We'll, analyze our AI of about 1,000 different young mothers and see what comes out from that.
Yep.
And it could turn it around to you in 1 week.
Yep.
So that really comes down to your point, like where they've picked what part of the process they can hone in on, and it's, can we develop synthetic data effectively, like what people, look and act like? And they're working with some really big and interesting brands right now too, and just doing some great stuff. So there's ways that it could come at. Other people would say there's absolutely nothing that can ever replace an individual's opinion.
Yep.
So I think there's going to be a lot happening, to your point, in the next 12 months.
I read a research report yesterday about synthetic data. And the importance of it, and how it is being introduced and used and understood. But where does that take us then?
Yes.
So that's maybe the next podcast.
Next time.
When Garrett Tyler-Parker joins us once again to discuss research, market, and analysis and insights in the wonderful world of maybe not just tourism. Garrett could well have moved on to do something else by then and apply these skills, but certainly always learning, always curious. So thank you for coming
great.
in.
Thanks, Dave.
No,
Cheers.
really appreciate Garrett coming in and sharing his wisdom, his knowledge, his experience, and to hear the stories of Tourism Research Australia. And I think he also left a bit of an Easter egg there, particularly for people in the Australian public service, that the digital profession and the data profession, and there are other professions as well coming online, procurement profession, HR profession, but it's just so important to be in community and sharing knowledge. And I know that inside the Australian Public Service there's also and I think it's inside the digital profession, there's a social media a group that get together, a couple of hundred social media experts who are working, sharing knowledge, wisdom, etc. So if you haven't joined up, you should. Because really, as Garrett said, there's just so much to be learned from your colleagues in those professions. So be sure to jump onto the Australian Public Service Commission and have a look at those professions and make sure that you take the benefit of the wisdom of your colleagues. So a big thanks to Garrett for coming back once again, and to you, the audience, a big thanks once again. Ratings and reviews always help us to be found, so wherever you're consuming this content, please, that would be great. Respond to some of the social media content. Let us know what you think of the program. We've been running now since 2015, and we're now well over 400 episodes of GovComms. And guess what? There are so many more people to talk to, so many more interesting people like Garrett who are prepared to share their knowledge with you. So we will continue to talk to people as we go through this wonderful exercise and transformation in the wonderful world of communications. But yes, a big thanks to Garrett for coming in once again. A big thanks to you. We'll be back at the same time in a month, as it always is, but we look forward to your company then. But please, until then, be kind to each other. My name is David Pembroke, and it's bye for now.